You hear it all the time, right? People comparing the military power of the United States and Europe. But here's the thing, it's not even close. And the reason for this huge gap isn't just about the number of soldiers or tanks. Nope. The real story is kinda hidden away in the spending, the structure, and the very industries that build the machines of war.
All right, let's just start with a number. And it's a number that's, well, it's almost hard to wrap your head around. The projected military spending for the U.S. in 2025 is getting incredibly close to $1 trillion. Just let that sink in. That single figure sets the stage for everything we're about to talk about.
Okay, so what about Europe? Well, if you take the military budgets of all 27 EU member states and add them all together, you get about half of what the US is spending. That right there, that staggering difference, is what we're going to unpack. Why is it so big, and what does it actually mean for who holds power in the world?
Right, so let's dig into this spending gap, because it's not just about who's got the deeper pockets, it's about what that money really buys you and what it doesn't. And here, you can see what that half really looks like with the hard numbers from 2024. The US is sitting at around 864 billion euros for defense. The entire EU 27 combined, 343 billion. Wow, that's more than 2.5 times the spending.
And look, this isn't just a US versus Europe thing. The scale of American spending is so massive that it makes up nearly half of all the money spent on defense across the entire planet. So the real capability gap isn't just between the US and Europe, it's pretty much between the US and everybody else.
But, money isn't the whole story. Not even close. To really get this gap, we have to look at how these massive forces are actually put together. And that brings us to a really fundamental difference: having one single unified army versus trying to get a whole bunch of them to work together.
So to get Europe's defense set up, you've got to understand this thing called the CSDP. It's not one big EU army. Think of it more like a framework that lets 27 different countries chip in with their own forces for missions. The best way to think about it is like an all-star team. All the players are fantastic, but at the end of the day, they all play for their own home teams. And believe me, those individual home teams, they are huge. If you add them all up, the EU member states have over 1.4 million active military personnel. So a lack of people is definitely not the problem. On paper, that is an enormous force.
So that's the big question, right? They're spending hundreds of billions of euros, which is a ton of money, even if it's less than the US, and they clearly have the people. So where's the disconnect? Why is there still this massive gap in what they can actually do? Well, the answer, it's in what you might call the engines of war. The real gap, the thing that truly separates the two, comes down to the huge differences in the industrial bases, the companies that actually build the jets, the tanks, and all the tech that defines a modern military. And this is the great industrial divide. On one side, you've got the US. It's pretty simple, actually. You have a handful of giant companies, the Big Five, and they all sell to one single massive buyer, the Pentagon. In Europe, it's the total opposite. The whole industry is fragmented along national lines. You have tons of different companies all trying to sell to 27 different governments, and each of those governments has its own wish list. And if you want to see what that fragmentation looks like on the ground, well, here it is. The US military, it uses one main type of battle tank. The EU, over 10 different kinds. The US has one primary infantry fighting vehicle. The EU, over 15. Imagine trying to manage the logistics, the spare parts, the training for all of that. It's a massive headache. And the fallout from all this? It's pretty stark. Just look at this. Between early 2022 and mid-2023, almost 2/3, 63% of all the military gear bought by EU countries came from the United States. That means Europe's own fragmented industry can't even keep up with the demand from its own armies, so they have to go shopping in America. Okay, so Europe knows this is a problem, a big problem, and they're absolutely trying to fix it. This brings us to the EU's big push lately to unify its strategy and build an industrial base that can actually work together. And the big idea driving all of this is something you hear a lot: strategic autonomy. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. It's the goal for the EU to be able to handle its own security, to stand on its own 2 feet, without having to be so dependent on allies like the United States for every little thing. So, how do they get there? Well, they've laid out some really clear goals for 2030. First, they want 40% of all equipment to be bought jointly, as a team. Second, they want at least half of the money spent on defense to be spent inside the EU. And third, they want to seriously boost the trade happening between their own defense companies. It's a direct shot at fixing that fragmentation problem.
But here's the catch. You can't just decide to build a Team Europe for defense without it affecting your relationships. And this new ambition creates an immediate, very complex tension with its biggest ally, who also happens to be its biggest competitor in this space, the United States.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, this transatlantic tightrope. Is the future going to be about cooperation or competition? Or what seems most likely, a really delicate balancing act between the two?
You know, the F-35 fighter jet is probably the perfect example of this whole dynamic. A lot of European countries are partners in the program. They even build parts for the jet. That's cooperation, right? But at the end of the day, it's an American plane with American technology at its core, which just reinforces that European reliance.
And a really big point of tension here is all about market access. You could almost call it a one-way street. American companies can set up shop and sell their products in Europe, but strict Buy American rules in the US make it almost impossible for European companies to sell to the Pentagon. They get less than 2% of those contracts. You can see why that might cause some friction.
So this is really the core of the challenge for Europe. They want to build up their own industries and be more independent. But for 70+ years, their entire security system has been built around NATO and woven together with American military tech. Trying to untangle that, even just a little bit, is a truly massive task.
And so all of this, it leaves us with one really big unanswered question. As Europe pushes forward with this new strategy, can it actually achieve that goal of true strategic autonomy without fundamentally changing the very nature of its long-standing alliance with the United States? That is going to be the question to watch for years to come.